When the host tried to challenge Elon Musk, his response wasn't just sharp, it was a chilling reality check. The air in the studio was electric, the kind of tension that felt thick enough to cut with a knife. The camera's red light blinked on, signaling the start of a live broadcast. A liberal talk show host, known for her sharp tongue and no-holds-barred approach, leaned forward in her chair, her eyes locked on the guest across from her. Elon Musk, dressed in a simple dark blazer, sat with a calm demeanor, his hands resting loosely on his knees. His presence alone commanded attention, but the air buzzed with anticipation as the audience waited to see how the billionaire inventor would handle the pointed questions already foreshadowed in the host's opening remarks. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice steady but laced with an edge of challenge. "You've been called many things: visionary, disruptor, even controversial. But some critics say your business practices and recent political views raise serious ethical questions. How do you respond to those who claim you're prioritizing profits over people?" Musk tilted his head slightly, the corners of his mouth forming a faint smile. He took a moment to respond, his eyes scanning the studio as if calculating the weight of his words. "I think it's fair for people to question things," he said, his voice low but clear. "But questioning isn't the same as assuming bad intent. If we're going to talk about ethics, maybe we should start by asking who controls the narrative, and why." The host blinked, momentarily caught off guard by his pivot. "Are you suggesting there's a larger issue at play here, beyond your actions?" Musk leaned forward, his tone steady but carrying an unmistakable gravity. "Absolutely. What concerns me isn't just criticism. It's the control of information. The way narratives are shaped to guide public perception. That's where the real danger lies." The room seemed to hold its breath. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. This wasn't the direction they'd expected. Musk wasn't just defending himself, he was steering the conversation into uncharted waters. But as the host tried to regain control of the narrative, Musk's next words would leave her and the audience grappling with a sense of unease they couldn't shake. The host quickly regained her composure, her sharp instincts kicking in. She leaned closer, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Mr. Musk, let's not stray too far from the point. We're talking about your decisions, like cutting staff at your companies, your controversial stance on free speech, and even your questionable alliances. Are you suggesting that the backlash you face is part of some orchestrated narrative?" Musk sat back in his chair, his posture relaxed but his gaze piercing. "I'm suggesting that what people believe is often shaped not by what's true, but by what they're told to believe. Let's look at the media landscape today. How often do you see balanced reporting? How often are voices that challenge the status quo silenced or dismissed as controversial?" The host raised an eyebrow. "So you're claiming you're a victim of media manipulation?" "Not just me," Musk said evenly, his voice calm but resolute. "It's bigger than me. The question isn't whether I'm a victim. The question is, who decides what you believe, what you're allowed to question? When information is controlled, freedom dies. It's that simple." The host exhaled sharply, clearly trying to keep the conversation on her terms. "That's a bold statement, but let's be honest. People have concerns about your platforms. Misinformation spreads like wildfire. Don't you think some controls are necessary to prevent harm?" Musk's lips curled into a wry smile. "Control in whose hands? Who decides what's misinformation? I can tell you it's not as clear-cut as people think. When you give a small group the power to determine the truth, you're handing them a weapon that can be used to suppress dissent, to stifle innovation, to control minds." The host seemed to falter for a moment, her carefully prepared questions beginning to crumble under the weight of Musk's counterpoints. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could feel the shift in dynamics. This wasn't just an interview, it was becoming a battle of ideologies. But Musk wasn't finished yet. His next move would turn the discussion from an exchange of ideas into a full-blown reckoning. Musk leaned in slightly, his eyes sharp and focused. His voice dropped to a measured tone, each word deliberate. "Here's the real danger. When media and powerful institutions align, they create an illusion of consensus. They don't just control the story, they control reality. And that's when freedom isn't just at risk, it's already gone. The host shifted uncomfortably in her chair. That sounds like conspiracy talk, Mr. Musk. Are you saying there's some coordinated effort to... What? Manipulate the world? I'm saying there's a system in place, and it's not designed for transparency or accountability. Let me give you an example, Musk said, holding the room in suspense. How many times have we seen stories come out only to be debunked weeks, months, even years later? By then, the damage is done. People don't remember the correction, they remember the lie. And the ones telling those lies face no consequences. The audience was silent. The camera zoomed slightly, catching the tension in the host's expression. She tried to regain control, her voice firmer. But isn't that why platforms like yours, social media, are under scrutiny? You allowed unchecked information to spread. Doesn't that make you part of the problem? Musk's response was quick and calm, his words carrying weight. Scrutiny is important, but it has to go both ways. When governments, corporations, and media work together to label dissent as misinformation, it's not about truth, it's about control. That's why free speech matters, even when it's messy, because the alternative is far worse. The host's confidence began to waver, her carefully constructed arguments struggling to hold under Musk's relentless logic. You're painting a very dystopian picture, Mr. Musk. Are you saying there's no hope for balance? For accountability? Musk's eyes narrowed slightly. There's hope, he said, his voice quieter now but no less powerful. But it starts with people questioning what they're told, not just accepting it because it comes from a trusted source. We have to be vigilant. We have to demand transparency. And we have to remember that freedom isn't something given, it's something we fight to keep. The weight of his words hung in the air, Leo now eerily quiet. For a moment, the host seemed unsure of what to say, her usual sharpness dulled by the gravity of the conversation. But the silence wouldn't last long. Musk had more to say, and what followed would force the audience to confront uncomfortable truths. Musk straightened in his chair, his demeanor shifting from conversational to resolute. Let me show you what I mean, he began, his voice steady, cutting through the silence. Take the recent controversies around whistleblowers, people who risk everything to expose corruption or manipulation. How are they treated? They're vilified, their credibility is destroyed, and the institutions they expose, they walk away untouched. The host attempted to interject, but Musk raised his hand slightly, not in dismissal, but as a subtle gesture for her to hold her rebuttal. Let's look at surveillance programs, he continued. Years ago, people thought government monitoring of citizens was a paranoid fantasy. Then we got the leaks. We learned how deep it really went. But instead of outrage leading to accountability, it became normalized. Now people shrug it off. They say, that's just the way things are, and that's the problem. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The audience, both in the studio and watching from their homes, hung on every syllable. Musk leaned forward again, his tone dropping slightly. Or take the headlines you see every day. Have you noticed how certain narratives dominate while others are buried? Stories that don't fit the preferred agenda are ignored, dismissed, or labeled misinformation. The host took a deep breath, visibly grappling with how to redirect the conversation. But isn't it the role of journalists to fact-check, to provide accurate information? Are you saying we should have no gatekeepers at all? Musk's response was measured but firm. Fact-checking is vital, but only when it's impartial. What we have now isn't fact-checking, it's selective enforcement. You don't need to silence everyone to control a narrative. You just need to silence enough people to make dissent seem isolated. That's how you manufacture consensus. The host finally found an opening, leaning forward with her own intensity. But doesn't your own platform contribute to this chaos? Aren't you part of the problem you're criticizing? Musk nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. Social media isn't perfect, but it's also one of the few places where people can still challenge the narrative, at least for now. The solution isn't more censorship, it's more transparency. If we start policing ideas, we lose innovation, and when innovation dies, so does progress. The room grew still again, the weight of the discussion palpable. The host glanced at her notes but seemed hesitant to push further. Musk seized the moment. "Ask yourself this," he said, his tone quieter but no less intense. "How much of what you believe is something you've truly questioned? And how much is something you've just been told to believe?" But before the host could respond, Musk shifted the conversation once again, steering it toward the profound implications of unchecked control and its impact on humanity's future. The host glanced nervously at the teleprompter, her confidence visibly shaken. The direction of the interview had slipped entirely out of her control, and the atmosphere in the studio had shifted. It wasn't just tense, it was unsettling. Even the studio crew, typically indifferent to the exchanges they witnessed, seemed transfixed. The faint sound of shuffling papers and the hum of the overhead lights were the only noises breaking the heavy silence. "Mr. Musk," the host began, her voice faltering slightly, "you're painting a very bleak picture of our society. But isn't this narrative of control and manipulation just a way to deflect from your own controversies? People say your ideas and decisions have consequences, ones that you seem to conveniently ignore." Musk's gaze didn't waver. He spoke calmly, his words carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the room. "Criticism is fair. Accountability is necessary. But the question isn't whether I've made mistakes. We all have. The question is, who benefits when we're too distracted by controversy to see the bigger picture? Look at what's happening around us. The erosion of privacy, the consolidation of power, the suppression of voices that don't align with a specific narrative. These aren't random events. They're symptoms of a system that prioritizes control over truth. The host's jaw tightened, her frustration evident. She was a professional, used to commanding the narrative, but Musk had taken the reins and wasn't letting go. "So what are you proposing?" she asked, her tone sharp. "That we trust billionaires like yourself to protect the truth? Isn't that just trading one kind of power for another?" Musk leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Trust isn't the answer. Transparency is. No one should have unchecked power. Not governments, not corporations, not individuals. The solution isn't to silence those who disagree. It's to create systems where truth can thrive, even when it's uncomfortable." The host hesitated, clearly weighing her next move, but the tension in her voice betrayed her unease. "This sounds more like a warning than a conversation, Mr. Musk." "It is a warning," Musk said softly, his tone almost empathetic now. "Because if we don't confront these issues, the cost won't just be freedom. It'll be the future of innovation, progress, and the very essence of what makes us human." The words lingered in the air like an echo. For the first time, the host seemed genuinely at a loss for how to proceed. Her gaze flickered to the audience, as if searching for some semblance of control, but the expression staring back at her mirrored her own unease, confusion, curiosity, even fear. But just as the tension reached its peak, Musk delivered a final thought that shifted the focus from the present to the consequences awaiting humanity if these patterns continued unchecked. Musk shifted in his seat, his expression softening but losing none of its intensity. He glanced briefly at the cameras, almost as if addressing each viewer personally. "Here's the reality," he began, his voice quieter now but resonating deeply. "Every decision we make, every piece of information we consume, shapes the world we leave behind. The question isn't just about power or control, it's about responsibility. Are we willing to question the narratives we're fed? Are we willing to demand better, not just from leaders and institutions, but from ourselves?" The host leaned back in her chair, visibly disarmed. Her sharp demeanor had been replaced by something unfamiliar: introspection. For once, she seemed less focused on winning the argument and more on understanding the gravity of what had just been said. "Mr. Musk," she said after a long pause, You've raised some important points. But what do you want people to take away from this? What's the action they should take? Musk's lips pressed into a thin line, his expression thoughtful. I'm not here to tell people what to think, he said finally. But I do want them to think, to question, to learn, to speak up. Freedom isn't guaranteed. It's something we build brick by brick every day, and if we're not careful, the walls we think are protecting us can become the ones that trap us. A heavy silence filled the studio, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Even the host seemed humbled, her polished responses and rehearsed comebacks abandoned. The broadcast had started as another contentious interview, but it had evolved into something far more profound, a moment of collective reckoning. The closing credits began to roll, but Musk leaned into the camera one last time, his expression earnest. If you've made it this far, he said, his voice softer but no less impactful, take a moment to ask yourself, who controls what you believe? And more importantly, are you willing to find out? The screen faded to black, leaving viewers across the nation sitting in stunned silence. Musk's warning wasn't just about systems of power or media manipulation. It was a call to action, a challenge to see beyond the surface and take ownership of their own beliefs. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing isn't the loss of truth, it's the loss of the will to seek it. If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a conversation that matters. And if you believe in questioning the narratives and seeking truth, subscribe to the channel. Together we can keep asking the hard questions.